大家好，我是施明帅，同时也是一个造梦的人。当视觉缺席，他们就必须用极致的触觉来探索世界。游泳时，仰赖身体的每一道触觉去修正偏差。创作时，双手必须重新成为仪器，记忆物件的空间与重量。梦想从来就不是单数，音乐里他们用更深沉的倾听，让伙伴的声音成为彼此最真实的在场证明。台湾公益联盟邀请你支持日常的梦想，看见独特的存在。
Welcome to the Working Bear Talks Electronics Manufacturing podcast. Here, we share insights and knowledge about electronics manufacturing and assembly skill from Working Bear's experience. If you enjoy our content, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a 5-star review to help more people discover our channel. You can also find all related links in the video description below.
Hello everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about a pretty simple topic. What are PCB and PCBA? What's the difference between them? And what are they actually used for? Before we jump in, let me quickly mention something. Working Bear also runs a blog about electronics manufacturing. If you're interested in learning more about this industry, feel free to check it out at mpe.researchmfg.com. All right, let's get started. PCB versus PCBA. What's the difference? At first glance, this might seem like a very basic question. But someone recently asked Working Bear about it, so let's go through it together. And if you happen to notice any mistakes while listening, feel free to let us know. Most people have probably heard the term PCB before. If you follow tech news, watch YouTube tech channels, or read articles about electronics, you've likely come across it. But PCBA is a little less familiar, especially if you're not working in the electronics industry. Sometimes people even confuse PCB and PCBA. They only differ by one letter, but in the electronics manufacturing world, they actually mean two very different things. What is a PCB? PCB stands for Printed Circuit Board. Some people also call it PWB, which stands for Printed Wiring Board. That term is used in some countries, but in most of Asia, people simply say PCB. The way PCBs are manufactured is actually somewhat similar to printing. Basically, a light image is projected onto a board through a film mask, and then chemical etching removes the unwanted copper. This process leaves behind the copper traces that form the electrical circuits. Over the years, PCB manufacturing technology has become much more advanced and precise. But the basic idea, printing circuits onto a board, is still the same. Why do we need PCBs? Modern electronic devices have so many features because they contain a huge number of electronic components and circuits. All of those components need something to sit on and something to connect them together. That's where the PCB comes in. A PCB basically acts as a carrier for electronic components. Components like resistors, capacitors, inductors, IC chips, connectors, all get mounted onto the PCB. The copper traces on the board provide the electrical pathways that allow signals to travel between components. Here's an easy way to visualize it. Imagine the Earth as a big piece of land. The roads connect cities and towns. In this analogy, the PCB is the land. The copper traces are the roads. The electronic components are the cities. Without the land and roads, the cities wouldn't be connected. Bare board versus assembled board. A PCB that only has the copper circuits but no components attached yet is called a bare board, or sometimes a blank circuit board. Once you start mounting electronic components onto that PCB, it becomes something different. It becomes a PCBA. Why PCBs are so important? PCBs are one of the most important foundations of the entire electronics industry. Almost every electronic product uses them, from smartphones and laptops to cars and industrial equipment. Flexible circuits, or FPCs, can also act as carriers for components. But those are typically used for specific applications where bending or space constraints are important. In most electronic devices, rigid PCBs are still the main platform. You could even say that the PCB is like the engine of the electronics industry, because almost every electronic device depends on it. Environmental impact of PCB manufacturing. One thing worth mentioning is that PCB manufacturing involves electroplating processes. Those processes require large amounts of water and electricity, and they can also create wastewater pollution if not managed properly. As environmental regulations become stricter around the world, the cost of PCB manufacturing has also increased. Major PCB companies in Taiwan. Taiwan actually has a very strong PCB industry. Some well-known companies include Zhending, Unimicron, Compec, Chinpun, Nanyang PCB, Gold Circuit, Nanya Plastics, Yaohua. And of course, there are many more companies involved in the PCB ecosystem. PCBA assembly is usually handled by system manufacturers or EMS companies such as Foxconn, Quanta, Compal, Pegatron, Wistron, Kinpo. These companies either assemble their own products or provide manufacturing services for global brands. Behind all of this, there's also a large upstream supply chain that produces materials like copper-clad laminates, insulating films, solder masks, adhesives, and stiffeners. So the PCB industry is actually a very large ecosystem. Why PCBs are used everywhere? There are several reasons why PCBs are so widely used. First, high wiring density. PCBs allow many circuits to be packed into a very small space, which supports the miniaturization of modern electronics. Second, high manufacturing consistency. PCBs can be mass-produced with extremely high repeatability, which reduces wiring errors compared to manual wiring. Third, automation. Both PCB manufacturing and PCBA assembly can be highly automated, which lowers labor costs and increases production efficiency. And finally, modular design. Different functions can be separated into different boards. If one module fails, you can simply replace the whole board. So, what is PCBA? Now, let's talk about PCBA. The easiest way to remember it is this. PCBA equals PCB plus assembly. A PCB without components is just a PCB. Once electronic components are assembled onto the board, it becomes a PCBA. Going back to our earlier example, PCB equals land with roads. PCBA equals land with roads and buildings. PCBA stands for Printed Circuit Board Assembly. Sometimes people also call it PCA, Printed Circuit Assembly, PWA, Printed Wiring Assembly. Naming different PCBAs. In a device that contains multiple circuit boards, each board is usually named based on its function. For example, main board, I/O board, display board, charging board. If there's only one board inside the product, it's often simply called the main board. How components are assembled onto a PCB. Today, the most common assembly method is SMT, or surface mount technology. The process works like this. First, solder paste is printed onto the PCB. Then, electronic components are placed onto the board. After that, the board goes through a reflow oven, where the solder melts and permanently attaches the components to the PCB. Another method is called wave soldering. This is usually used for through-hole components, which are larger components with leads that go through holes in the board. In wave soldering, the PCB passes over a wave of molten solder, which solders the component leads to the board. Some products actually use both SMT and wave soldering in the same assembly process. Final thoughts. So, after today's discussion, you should have a clear understanding of the difference. A PCB is just the board with copper circuits. A PCBA is the completed assembly with electronic components installed. A PCBA can sometimes be sold directly as a finished product, for example, computer motherboards, graphics cards. But a PCB by itself cannot function as an electronic device. Only after components like ICs, resistors, capacitors, inductors, and connectors are added does it become a working electronic assembly. All right, that wraps up today's discussion. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave a comment and join the conversation. And if you're interested in electronics manufacturing, you're always welcome to subscribe to Working Bear's YouTube and podcast channels. Don't forget to like and share. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.